The important thing is this legislation is going to allow several children presently in the care of the minister to enter into stable adoptive homes. We all know that a stable, loving home is always in the best interest of the child, and I hope these changes will allow children who were previously ineligible for adoption to find permanent homes. Having said that, I must admit I am a little disappointed too. Rather than changing the Children and Family Services Act that is over 15 years old, I would be much happier if we were voting on a proper adoption act today. Newfoundland made the difficult but important move of passing an adoption act in 2003 that not only allows open adoptions, but it allows improved access to adoption information for adoptees and birth parents. I know that is a controversial subject, Mr. Speaker, and I have it on pretty good authority that this government has no intention of ever revisiting adoption information. In a way, I can understand because the last attempts at dealing with it were very heated and difficult for everyone involved. However, Ontario, BC, and Newfoundland have now made major changes to their legislation to allow improved access to adoption information while still respecting the rights of parents who gave their children up for adoption in a different era. I know it would not be an easy path to address this aspect of adoption, but I don't think that we as legislators should shy away from the difficult choices. Sooner or later, given the UN Convention and what other provinces are doing, we will have to revisit this issue. My only other regret is the speed with which the legislative process for this particular bill was handled. It didn't allow the word to get out soon enough for groups and individuals with an interest in these changes to come forward at law amendments. I know the minister is anxious to move forward with adoptions for children who are waiting. However, I suspect, despite the department's earlier consultation and the feedback to my caucus, there will be more concerns coming forward as this bill becomes better known by the public. I hope that the Department of Community Services will undertake a widespread education campaign for family lawyers, women's organizations, parents' rights groups, and others, so that everyone is clear on the intent and interpretation of these changes. Thank you once again to all the staff at Community Services that worked so hard on this bill. With that, I'll take my seat, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Recognize the honourable member for Cape Breton South.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, certainly it's a pleasure to rise in support of this bill today. And Mr. Speaker, our party throughout this session and throughout the year, actually the past year, have had many difficulties with the Department of Community Services, and they're have been well documented over the past year. But we don't have any difficulty with this particular initiative, and I think that it's time that I thank the minister for this particular bill. I think the minister and his staff, in particular, Deputy Minister Marion Tyson and her staff and the people from Justice who were involved with this particular bill, have done a great job on it, and I want to commend the minister on bringing this bill forward today. And I just hope that we'll see some other major initiatives on the positive side coming from that department in the future. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the honourable Mr. Community Services be to close debate on Bill number 202. The honourable minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the comments from the two opposition critics. This bill was an accumulation of a lot of consultation and research with the various stakeholder groups, and it does entrench into practice the notice provision that is out there, but the friendly amendment from the NDP brings this into the legislation, and I think that makes it a better bill. I appreciate the comments from both critics, and I appreciate the fact that the opposition critics made use of the opportunity to consult with staff and to have an input into this bill. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to close third reading.
Third reading of Bill 202. Is the House ready for the question? All those in favour say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried.
Bill 202, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 5 of the Acts of 1990, the Children and Family Services Act.
Order the bill do pass. Order the title be as read by the clerk. Order the bill be engrossed. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, would you please call Bill 205, the Securities Act?
Bill number 205, the Securities Act. The Honourable Deputy Premier.
Reading of Bill 205.
Motion is for third reading of Bill 205. Is the House ready for the question? All those in favour say aye. Counterminded nay. Motion is carried.
205, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 418, the Revised Statutes 1989, the Securities Act.
Order the bill do pass. Order the title be as read by the clerk. Or the bill be engrossed. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, would you please call Bill 206, the Camp Hill Foundation Act?
Bill number 206, the Camp Hill Foundation Act. The Honourable Minister of Education.
Bill number 206.
Motion is for third reading of Bill number 206. The House ready for the question? All those in favour say aye. Counterminded nay. Motion is carried.
Bill 206, entitled An Act to Repeal Chapter 2 of the Acts of 1987, the Camp Hill Foundation Act, and Chapter 492 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Victoria General Hospital Foundation Act.
Order the bill do pass. Order the title be as read by the clerk. Order the bill be engrossed. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Speaker, would you please call Bill 208, the Workers' Compensation Act?
Bill number 208, the Honourable Deputy Premier.
Yes, on behalf of the Honourable Minister of Labour and Environment and Labour, I move third reading of Bill 208.
The Honourable Member of Cole Harbour Eastern Passage.
Thank you. Briefly on this, Mr. Speaker, this is workers' comp is legislation that often comes in this House and sometimes gets passed, sometimes gets stalled at law amendments, sometimes deals are cooked in back rooms. But this is one that I'm happy to stand here and say this is a piece of legislation that there was thorough consultation. All the stakeholders, injured workers, organized labor, and management, employer representatives agreed to these changes prior to introduction. And can I say we see the difference in how this legislation has sailed through this House because we had consensus, and I dearly hope that not only these changes will mean that we'll have all the stakeholders at the table at workers' compensation so that a lot of those issues can be resolved there, but also I hope it's a precedent that we can set that consensus will be developed by stakeholders on workers' compensation before we have governments introducing legislation and trying to ram it down the throats of some stakeholders, Mr. Speaker. I hope this is a precedent that we can set for the future, and we're more than happy to support it. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Preston.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, it's a pleasure to rise on this bill. This is a very positive bill, and as the honourable member from the opposition has said, it's one that was through consultation with the communities all involved. The Workers' Compensation Board has had in some areas had a reputation of not working very well, and some real serious concerns about the governance of it over the years. And I think this is the first step towards changing that and making a very positive change for all the people in the province that have to resort to workers' compensation when they're injured at the job. And also the ability for employers to know that their contributions to the system are well looked after, and indeed it's a system that we can afford, and at the same time providing reasonable benefits to injured workers in the community. And with that, we support the government's bill, and I want to thank the Minister for his support as we've worked and gone through that as well. Thank you.
The Honourable Member Cape Breton Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just a few short words. You know, it's a probably great pleasure I stand here today and talk about this bill because it is the basic foundation of the Dorsey Report. If nothing else came of Dorsey to start, Mr. Speaker, is that we have governance. The governance has to be the foundation on which WCB moves forward, and we're so appreciative of the stakeholders who stood by and moved this forward. The injured workers groups, labor, business, Department of Labor, and indeed the board itself, where they recognize that this is the starting point. This is where real change is going to start to happen at WCB. It's a newfound respect for everybody within that system. So, Mr. Speaker, it gives me great pleasure to support this bill going forward, to provide a new style of board, a new style of governance for that very important insurance system that we have protecting workers in this province. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the Honourable Deputy Premier to be a closed debate on Bill number 208. The Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour. Bill 208.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm very pleased to be able to stand and close debate on the bill. I certainly do appreciate the comments that were made, and I know there's been a lot of hard work and there's been a lot of cooperation and hard work together. So thank you very much.
Motion is for third reading of Bill 208. Is the House ready for the question? All those in favour say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried.
Bill 208, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 10 of the Acts of 1994-95, the Workers' Compensation Act.
Order the bill do pass. Order the title be as read by the clerk. Order the bill be engrossed. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, would you please call Bill 210, the Health Authorities Act?
Bill number 210, the Health Authorities Act. The Honourable Member for Dartmouth North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to move third reading of Bill 210, an act to amend Chapter 6 of the Acts of 2000, the Health Authorities Act.
Motion is for third reading of Bill number 210. Is the House ready for the question? All those in favour say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried.
Bill 210, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 6 of the Acts of 2000, Health Authorities Act.
Order the bill do pass. Order the title be as read by the clerk. Order the bill be engrossed. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, would you please call Bill number 79, the Petroleum Products Pricing Act?
Bill number 79. The Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia, Municipal Relations.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to move third reading of Bill number 79, the Petroleum Products Pricing Act.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton Centre.
Mr. Speaker, first of all, I'd like to thank the Minister for bringing this bill forward. And indeed, it was a bumpy road to get here, to say the least. And I think we had to stop more than once for gas. So, Mr. Speaker, but I think in true fashion, the ones that supplied the real fuel for this vehicle to get through all the hurdles, Mr. Speaker, were the Retail Gasoline Retailers Association. They're the ones to be thanked. You know, Mr. Speaker, I guess I would say that I would have liked to seen our bill come through, and that's fine, but that's part of give and take. But it's on all sides of this House that we realize that the vital role that these hardworking women and men play in rural Nova Scotia and how they're a vital part of that, the commerce that goes in those areas, Mr. Speaker. So I'm particularly glad to have a little bit of support from various areas, but indeed a whole lot of support from the retailers. So, Mr. Speaker, I take my place and look forward for Bill 79 going through.
The Honourable Member for Victoria the Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I too rise with pleasure to see that Bill 79 is passed. After being a member of the committee and traveling around the province last summer and seeing the hard time that business operators were having just to make a living. And Mr. Speaker, in this day and age, we're elected to support our members, and I feel quite confident that we have done so with this. I really appreciate the members coming forward today that are in the gallery from the operators, bringing their concerns forward. They were mentioned at all our meetings. Some of them were listened to. Some of them felt that they weren't being listened to, and it was through their undying efforts to come forward today to cause this to happen. And I was very pleased to introduce the resolution stating that we would be supporting this earlier in today's session. And Mr. Speaker, I'm looking forward to seeing the results of this on a positive basis in the fall when we re-sit again, that these independent dealers will still be with us and be glad that we passed this legislation today. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased that this legislation is coming forward.
Recognize the Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia, Municipal Relations, be to close debate on Bill number 79. The Honourable Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, in closing debate, I want to remark that the member opposite was correct. It was a bumpy road, and we did run out of gas at one point in time, but luckily enough, we revived this piece of legislation. I want to thank both parties on the opposite side for their support and cooperation and being able to bring this piece of legislation forward. I believe this legislation will provide for an opportunity to government to provide some protection for rural Nova Scotia, particularly the operators of service stations and consumers, and I think it's the right direction for us to move forward in. And having said that, I move third reading of Bill number 79.
Motion is for third reading of Bill number 79. Is the House ready for the question? All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried.
Bill 79, title and act respecting the price of petroleum products.
Or the bill do pass, or the title be as read by the clerk, or the bill be engrossed. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Speaker, I would ask for the concurrence of the House to move to the revert to the order of business reports of committees. Presenting reports of committees.
Reports of committees. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as Chairman of the Committee on Law Amendments, I am directed to report that the committee has considered the following bill: an act to amend Chapter 3 of the Acts of 1994-95, the Farm Registration Act. The committee recommends this bill to the favorable consideration of the House with certain amendments.
Or this bill refer the committee, or the whole House on bills. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Speaker, I move that you do now leave the chair and the House resolve in the committee of the whole House on bills.
Agreed?
Agreed.
Recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Chairman, would you please call Bill number 169, the Farm Registration Act?
Bill number 169, the Farm Registration Act. Do the clauses carry? Does the title carry? Does the bill carry? Bill is carried. Recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
You can now rise and report this bill.
Chairman of the Committee of the whole House on bills reports.
The committee's met, and the chair is recommending to the House its favorable consideration Bill 169 without amendment.
Agreed? When should this bill be read? Agreed? The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Chairman, would you please call the order of business public bills for third reading?
Public bills for third reading.
Speaker, would you please call Bill number 169, the Farm Registration Act?
Number 169, the Honourable Member for Annapolis.
I move third reading of Bill 169.
Motion is for third reading of Bill number 169. Is the House ready for the question? All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried.
Bill 169, title and act to amend Chapter 3 of the Acts of 1994-95, the Farm Registration Act.
Order this bill do pass. Order the title be as read by the clerk. Order that the bill be engrossed. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, that completes the government's business for today. I move now that the House do recess until 6 o'clock, and that the moment of interruption should be considered to be 4:17.
Is it agreed? We'll reach the moment of interruption. The Honourable Member Cape Breton Nova.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in my place today to speak about the indexing of pension for former Cisco employees, Mr. Speaker. I received much information on this over the last, since I've been elected, the last 19 months from Mr. Alan Griffiths and Mr. Frank Corbett at that time, who was on the negotiating team for that deal, Mr. Speaker. This all deal came about when the whole idea of indexing in the contract was as if to say that if the indexing of the Cisco pensions was based on the DeFerco deal. Well, we all know now that the DeFerco deal has been gone and whatever else, so these men that have worked and spent their livelihood on the steel plant have no indexing of their pension. Mr. Speaker, it's probably one of the only pensions in Nova Scotia that doesn't have any indexing at the cost of living allowance based on the consumer price indexing, Mr. Speaker. There was 800 employees at the time of the closure of Sydney Steel. 600 of those employees received enhanced pensions, and the other 200 employees were into the severance package and are still working. And I'm just talking about how I feel myself personally as a former steel worker, that I had a phone call from a Mr. Robinson, who will turn 90 years of age in September, who went on pension in the 70s, Mr. Speaker. and to this day still makes the $300 that he made back then. And that's what he has to live on. He'll be 90 years of age in September. This government is responsible for the closure of Sydney Steel and the mismanagement of the pension fund, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the right thing to do here, Mr. Speaker, is to sell a few loads of that scrap that's on the ground down there and make sure that the price of scrap today is top-notch. The price of a couple of boatloads of that scrap would probably be enough to put in the fund so that the fund can be upgraded. And another issue that some of these pension steelworkers have is that when the whole thing about the pension plan being fully funded, it can never be fully funded if there's nobody paying into it. So, and members are passing away all the time. So it seems like this is an injustice that's been done to these men. And some of these guys have spent their livelihood, their years, their families, their grandfathers, their fathers, many years and paid into this here. But when they could live to be 90 years of age and their pension will be still the same as it was in 2001 when the steel plant closed, Mr. Speaker. And I think that any kind of pension should be based on the cost of living allowance, based on the consumer price index. This year we saw it at 1.9%. Even that's a modest little increase, but it's any kind of help as the time goes by, and these men are getting older in age and they're in their 50s and 60s. The cost of home heating oil, the cost of gasoline, the cost of electricity, the cost of insurance. All these costs are rising around these people, and they have nothing but their pension that they had since the closure of the plant to help to defer some of these costs. I mean, by the time in another 10 or 15 years time comes, a lot of these people will be living in poverty. So, these were the people that produced all the steel for World War II, people that produced the steel for many years. Every piece of rail in this country, from Cape Breton to British Columbia, mostly produced for CP Rail and CN Rail, was produced at Sydney Steel. And more lives were lost at Sydney Steel over the years producing this, and the widows of these pensioners with no indexing of their pension, the same thing that they got 40 years ago. And I mean, I just think that there has to be something done here, you know what I mean, to see if that we can, I know when I read the contract it said contingent on the zero cost to the province. I mean, we're talking about people's lives here, we know, we have to take care of these men. And I just think that it's just been an injustice. The steel plant's gone. I mean, and this was the whole campaign of this government, was to get rid of Sydney Steel. Who cannot forget those famous postcards with a great big X and right through the middle of the steel plant, and you flipped the card over and it was open more hospital beds. Well, we know now in this province that there's no more hospital beds opened, but we do know one thing: there's no more Sydney Steel. And it's a shame to see that these workers are struggling to provide for their families on a pension plan that has no indexing. And they worked hard their whole lives to make sure. And I'll give you a quote of an employee of the, I guess, so-called Terrapons agency, then Pars Barker Dunham, said in his column when this all happened, before he became a communication consultant for the government, these are not generous pensions. And this is now by a person that is employed, or his company is employed, to provide communications for this government. I mean, this is what he said. These are not generous pensions. A lot of these men are on pension at $1,300, $1,400, and the rate goes up as the more seniority that they had. And I just feel that it's just an injustice, and I think that the government has to, if there's any, they're putting $20 million into Cisco this year, investing in that. I mean, take some money and invest it into their pension plan. Yeah. You know what I mean? So we can actually see if that pension plan can grow, maybe get invested, so we can get some indexing on those pensions for those men. They've been suffering from the day that they went on pension. The steel was slapped on the table at the Union Hall and said, take it or leave it. Now, I, Mr. Speaker, would like to give some time to my leader, the member from Cole Harbour, and I would like for him to have his say on this matter too. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the honourable leader of the official opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One of the great privileges one gets from being the leader of the opposition or the leader of any party is the opportunity to travel throughout this province and to meet our citizens. And I must say that at no place in this province is that privilege greater than when you travel to Cape Breton, because the people of Cape Breton are so entirely enthusiastic about the communities in which they live, about the province in which they live, about their island. And I have to say that it's on so many occasions that I have been there and spoken with former steel workers, and they've toiled in that steel plant to help build this province. And when they retired, Mr. Speaker, they retired with pensions that were essentially frozen on the date at which they retired. And many of them have for years tried to find ways to survive while their pension income has remained stagnant. And as my colleague from Cape Breton Nova pointed out, as the costs of everything have continued to rise, the burden on them and their families has grown greater and greater. And I think there is an obligation on behalf of the government, there's an obligation on behalf of the members of this legislature to look at the plight of these steelworkers, the plight of these men and women who went, I'm not sure if there were, I guess it would have been some women who worked in the office would be in the same position, I assume. But mostly, I will say, Mr. Speaker, it's been the ex-men, ex-steelworkers who I've run into who have raised this issue with me. And I have to say, they make such a compelling case, and I think it's up to the members of this legislature to understand and to try and do something for these people. And if there was any indication on behalf of the government that they were willing to look at some formula that would recognize that the pensions that were decided upon, in many cases 20 or 25 years ago, need to be adjusted in order to take into account the increase in the cost of living over those years. I know that the members of 1064, that the steel workers and their families would be eternally grateful to the members of this legislature. And I'm appealing, Mr. Speaker, on behalf of our caucus and on behalf of those families, because I believe that this is just the right thing to do. It's just the fair thing to do to recognize their contribution to this province and to the island of Cape Breton and to their communities. Thank you.
Thank you. I recognize the honourable member for Cape Breton South.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Rise to say a few words in support of this resolution, and at the outset I want to thank the member from Cape Breton Nova for bringing this matter forward here today for debate. This is, and actually this pension issue with Sydney Steelworkers is an issue that is both past and present. And when you're dealing with the issue of index pensions, you're also dealing with a current issue for members of the who are now laid off Sydney Steel, who have been expecting a pension and have not been able to convince the government, the current government, that indeed they're owed particular monies for pension. But I'll spend a few seconds talking about the index pension. And I'm one, like the member from Cape Breton Nova, who has a great deal of interest in Sydney Steel, and not only in the company itself, but its work, the people who work there. But having said that, we both have had relatives who worked at Sydney Steel for many years, including my father, who was there for 42 years. And when he retired, he didn't get much time to spend his pension, unfortunately, but his pension was the grand sum of $375 a month after 42 years of work at Sydney Steel. And I'm sure that the member from Cape Breton Nova knows of similar situations in his relatives and people that he knows in the Whitney Pier and Ashby area. I have to tell you, Mr. Speaker, that the workers at Sydney Steel have been much maligned over the years. and they did not deserve that. There are people working in the management of Sydney Steel over a number of years who are getting very nice pensions, I might add, very nice pensions, while the steel workers have been trying to get some justice here. You know, and people forget that the Sydney Steel Workers, at least since 1967, I believe it was, or 68, have become government employees, you know, and are not treated the same as other government employees in this province. They are employees of they were employees of a Crown corporation, as my friend from Cape Breton Nova so rightly pointed out. The place is closed, so they're not now members of the government employees, but they were members of a Crown corporation, and other members of Crown corporations in this province have pensions that are indexed. The steelworkers do not. And I think that's a shame, Mr. Speaker, that this government has not addressed that matter. When you look at what's happening down there now, the government put $20 million into Sydney Steel this year, even though the place is closed, to make their bottom line look good. As my friend from Cape Breton Nova pointed out, that could have gone to some indexing of pensions, or some pensions to members who are still struggling to get a pension out of Sydney Steel. So I also want to remind Nova Scotians, and through you, Mr. Speaker, that the government is spending millions on the decommissioning of Sydney Steel. You know, companies are making millions of dollars off of the closure of Sydney Steel with nothing to show for it. They're not producing anything. They're closing the place down. Ernst & Young are making millions. They were sent in there about 4 years ago as a liquidator, and they're still there. You know, they've made millions off it. Zoom has made millions off it. Other contractors. There's political appointments there making big salaries that the government have put in there. The only people that aren't benefiting from the decommissioning are the steel workers. And I think some attention should have been paid to the plight of these people who have worked there for many, many years and still are without indexed pensions. People call me and they say, when are we going to get justice on the pensions? And Mr. Speaker, you know what I've told them? When the government changes in Nova Scotia. That's about the only chance you're going to have. Because the pleas have fell on deaf ears with this government. This government is not interested in the plight of the Sydney Steelworkers, either past, present, or in the future. There's no question in my mind about that, and I think their interest today is evidenced by across the way here today, and I know I shouldn't point out the fact, so I won't, but I sound like I'm playing to an empty house here today when I'm looking over there. But I do appreciate the members of the official opposition listening to me anyway. But I have to tell you, Mr. Speaker, that there's an injustice here that has to be corrected. There's an injustice here that cries out. I remember the minister responsible for Sydney Steel and the Premier coming to Sydney, and they said, don't worry, the steelworkers will be looked after. We have a buyer for the Sydney Steel plant, and you people are going to be looked after. If this sale falls through, don't worry about it, we'll look after you. That never happened. That never happened at all. You know, the minister of the day stood in front of the Steelworkers Hall and promised steelworkers they'd be compensated, their pensions would be safe, and to this day they're still fighting for justice, Mr. Speaker. They're still fighting for justice. There are issues out there. What's going to happen to these steelworkers in another few months, or maybe even a year or two, when the government gets tired of paying off all its friends, the contractors, for large contracts there? What's going to happen when they fire sale that equipment, Mr. Speaker, the continuous caster, the U-mill, all the important ingredients for rail making, for example, were fire sale for $4.5 million, and then the company that was sold to sold it for $25 million in Iran. You know, it made a quick $21 million profit for that equipment, by the way, that was worth 10 times what the government sold it for. And I'm saying that shame on the government for allowing that to happen. That money could have been used for steelworkers. As a matter of fact, Mr. Speaker, if they had left the equipment on the site, I'm sure that some private sector operator would have decided, with the expertise that's available, to operate a small rail mill in the Sydney area in private hands because of the world shortage of steel, particularly in rails, that we're seeing. Now what's going to happen is the government have fire-saled the equipment, and Iran will probably make rails and sell them back to the Canadian government. or to CP and CN. That's what's probably going to happen here. Instead of the rails being produced by people in Sydney, they'll be produced by somebody in Iran, and the government of Nova Scotia will have given them a free ticket to do it. There's no question in my mind that the government set out to win the last election on the backs of the Sydney steelworker, and they accomplished that. And I again refer to my opening statement. The steelworkers were much maligned and did not deserve that. So lots of people should have been maligned there, but not the steelworkers. And I can tell you that the only people that are hurting there, Mr. Speaker, the only people are the steelworkers that are on pension. As I said to you earlier, people like the people who worked with my father on the plant that are out there right now. Right now, still, you know, they're in their 80s and 90s now, and they're still only getting $375 or less a month. Whatever, $310 or whatever it is. You know, some of them are getting even less than that. So there's a new group of pensioners who are down there now who are going to be in the same position as they grow older. No index pension. And to me, that's cries out for somebody to do something about it because, Mr. Speaker, every single person that I know working for a Crown corporation, and that's a problem because the government has never admitted that steelworkers were government employees. The day that the government took over the operations of Sydney Steel, they became government employees through the Crown corporation called Sydney Steel. The government has never acknowledged that, nor has the government acknowledged the plight of the steelworkers who were promised justice by the Premier of today and the Cisco minister, who was the Minister of Economic Development at the time. I can be a little kinder to the Premier in regards to his statements because he did his usual dance around the issue, but I can't be kind to the Minister of Development, who, Mr. Speaker, did not tell the truth to the Sydney steelworkers at the time. Did not tell the truth. And got the first plane out of Sydney the same afternoon, and that was the last they seen of him, after he made that promise to keep them quiet at the time. And it worked for a while, but now they're realizing they were duped. They were duped, and it's a shame, Mr. Speaker. Some of these people are living on very limited incomes, and they worked hard over the years. You know, anybody who's worked on the Sydney Steel plant would know that's no piece of cake to work, for example, in the coke ovens. We all know the industrial hazards of working there over the years, and that's another matter that history will address at some point down the road, as well as the environmental problems at Sydney Steel. That's going to have to be addressed. But right now, there's an issue that the government can do something about. Providing adequate pensions for Sydney steelworkers, including a renewed look at the indexing problem for the pensioners at Sydney Steel. And I hope that the government will listen to the steelworkers, and I have a meeting scheduled, Mr. Speaker, with Roger Faulkner. I believe it's next week. He's with the United Steelworkers of America to discuss this issue. And I hope that we all can get together and convince the government to do something about it. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Thank all members for taking part in this debate this evening. Very important debate, and the House recessed till 6 p.m.
you.